Hi, everybody. Happy Tuesday. It's Dr. Chris here of YouTube, Dr. Christine Anderson Chiropractor, my Optimal Health, Optimal Life program. I'm so happy you joined me today. And I'm going to continue in this theme of fertility. And we talked in general about female fertility and male fertility, but I want to get into a little bit more of the nutritional aspect to support fertility. And I do recommend going back to my one of my first episodes where I talk about optimal nutrition because these general rules are going to apply. But I'm also going to delve a little bit more about how to support things like our metabolism and egg health and things like that. So it'll be a little bit more specific to fertility. So diet especially has an impact on metabolic issues like diabetes, obesity, and hyperlipidemia, which is basically fat in our blood, too much fat in the blood. And these are especially associated with high calorie diets. So your diet can affect your fertility either by direct damage to the egg itself. Remember, a woman is born with all her eggs, and so we have to keep them healthy throughout our lifetime. And they do degrade depending on your lifestyle, on what you're eating, if you are exposing yourself to any toxins and things like this. So living a healthy life is going to go towards keeping your eggs healthy throughout your entire reproductive cycle. The other thing it can do, diet can do, is affect what's going on in the brain with something called the pituitary hypothalamic axis. I know that sounds like a bunch of mumbo jumbo, but if you remember last time with our talk about female fertility, your pituitary gland is the one that produces all those hormones that stimulate your ovary to produce a follicle, which will produce an egg, and then luteinizing hormone, which is going to help keep your hormonal levels going, especially progesterone, to keep a pregnancy early on. So if you are affecting your brain health, and especially this hypothalamic pituitary axis, it's going to affect what goes on with your fertility. So let's talk a little bit just in general about some of the vitamins and minerals and dietary factors that can help. So first of all, probiotics and fermented foods. That's going to be your yogurts. I prefer to do non-dairy. It can be kefir. It can be kombucha. I like to make my own because then I can use some black tea and green tea and some organic sugar and control how much sugar goes in there. Your sauerkrauts and fermented vegetables, all of those things are going to go towards a good microbiome. And again, go back to some of my earlier posts on the gut health because your brain health depends on your gut health and your brain controls every single thing. So if you're not able to keep a good gut health, you won't be able to take in your nutrients. So you can eat your good food and you can take your supplements, but if it doesn't get absorbed into your system and digested, it's not going to do you any good. So you may take some probiotics. There's different sorts out there. I use ones that are spores of the probiotics. I use other ones that are different strains, supportive specifically for the female health. So there's so many different kinds that sometimes it's better to do switch off your products every now and again just to make sure you're getting enough of a variation of probiotics. But even better is to incorporate these fermented foods too. All right, things like vitamin A, D, and E, these are all considered to be antioxidants, and I'll talk about that in a second. Vitamin D has also many other benefits. So it's actually a hormone, believe it or not. Omega-3 fatty acids. So, especially things like DHA, this is docosahexaenoic acid, and it is an essential component to your brain structure. So, if you do not have the right structure, your brain cannot function. And if you do not get in sources of DHA, which are essential, your brain or your body will make something called DPA as a replacement, and that's not going to give you good function in your brain. So, you do want to make sure you have good sources of DHA. Now, most of the time, people are going to take in, they're going to either consume fish or do something like fish oil. Here's the problem with fish, all right? We have used our oceans and our lakes and rivers and whatnot as dumping grounds for chemicals. So many industries just pour their toxins into our waterways, and they are so polluted. And what happens is that the sea life concentrates those chemicals in their flesh, especially in the fat cells, because this is what things like heavy metals like mercury and cadmium and hormone disrupting chemicals like dioxins and PCBs do. They can't stay in the blood, they have to deposit somewhere. So, the bigger the fish, the more likely there are those concentrations of those chemicals, especially those hormone disrupting chemicals and the neurotoxic chemicals that you're then going to eat and incorporate into your own body cells. So if you want to do fish, you want to do something like really small, like sardines. Now, I don't eat fish, and I get my source from an algae plant, which is where the fish get their source of DHA. So it's the original source. And no, I don't eat algae, but I do take a supplement that is formed from algae. And this is the way I get my DHA. And this is so important for so many reasons, but including fertility. And then there's other omega-3 fatty acids that you can get from plants like pumpkin seeds, walnuts. If you look at walnuts, they look like little brains. So that's exactly what it does. It supports the brain. Some of these omega-3 fatty acids can be converted into DHA, but it's not a perfect conversion. Sometimes if you have too much stress or there are other things going on in your life, it will block that conversion. So I like to do the multi-layered approach where I'm taking in my omega-3 fatty acids with pumpkin seeds and walnuts and hemp seeds and chia and that type of stuff. Take my algae with DHA. And then there's another aspect of essential oils called EPA, and I will take that in my supplement with the DHA. The other aspect I want to make clear about this too is there's a ratio of omega-3 fats to omega-6, and the balance should be 1-to-1. Unfortunately, with the American diet, or a lot of the Western diets, I should say, is that we get far more omega-6 than omega-3s, and these are pro-inflammatory. And I talked about some conditions before that create inflammation in the body when you're looking at women trying to get pregnant, things like endometriosis and pelvic inflammatory disease, and even things like PCOS that create a lot of inflammation. And when you have inflammation, just think of your body being on fire. It is not going to be able to function at its best. So you want to stay away from processed things with added oils. So you might see in the label like vegetable oil added or canola or trying to think what else they put on there. So basically you want to stay away from those as much as possible. If you eat like corn, which has the omega-6 in it, fine, but then corn oil, it gets very concentrated. So you have to be careful about these very cheap oils that are added to a lot of things, and certainly fried foods. All right, we also have things like selenium, which is another antioxidant. I'm going to talk more in a little bit about magnesium, bioflavonoids, which are usually along with a source of vitamin C. So they're found in things like the rinds of citrus fruit and rose hips. They're really good for the body and the integrity of the vascular system. I'm going to go into more detail in a minute about B vitamins, including things like methylfolate versus folic acid. And then I'll talk a little bit about iodine adequate protein, and a little bit about vitamin C because you need just the right amount, not too much, not too little. And of course, avoiding all those processed things like artificial sweeteners and processed sugars and colors and dyes and flavors and things in cans and boxes and things you get at fast food and takeaway. All of these things are going to be so devoid of nutrition, and they're going to rob you because they're going to create a situation where they'll give you calories but not be nutrient dense. So you're going to put on more weight, which then will predispose you to estrogen imbalances because fat cells make estrogen. And so if you have you want enough, right? But you don't want too much to be out of balance with what you need. And that relationship between obesity or being overweight with things like diabetes and these other conditions that have an effect on your whole metabolic condition. Organic, organic, organic. It does make a difference. Don't let people tell you it doesn't. When things contain pesticides and herbicides and Roundup and all those chemicals, they're poisons. All right. The purpose is to poison, and they will poison your body, and they will create toxins in your body. And whenever you have toxins, the body will put fat around those toxins to wall them off. And there you go. Once again, we're back to this obesity, overweight, and the imbalance of hormones. So it does make a difference. All right. What we can do to enrich the endometrium, this is the lining in the uterus that builds up in our menstrual cycle. If we have a fertilization, this is the nice cushion, the nice bed that the embryo can implant in and then grow into a baby. So we need a nice enriched endometrium, and we need vitamins A, E, and selenium for that. So those are super antioxidants. Antioxidants are what protect us from oxidative stress. That is free radicals. It's not only from our environment, which has free radicals, but it's from our own body. Our own metabolic processes create free radicals that are quelched, and these antioxidants join hands with them to make them less reactive, because as they ping around, they create damage, they create inflammation, they age us, they age our insides and our outsides, and this is not really optimal if we're trying to get pregnant or for health in general. And I believe I have a YouTube show on antioxidants, if I'm thinking right. If not, I will do one at some point. For the thyroid, we want to support the thyroid with iodine sources. So I try to do this with food first versus taking a supplement. Or if I'm taking a supplement, I like it to be food-based. So things like kelp. The other thing that supports the thyroid is B2, which is also called riboflavin, and you can find this in almonds and wheat germ, so things like that. So you always try to get it from food first. With miscarriage prevention, we want adequate protein. So that's going to look different for everybody. We don't want too much, we don't want too little, and they also found with studies that a vegetable source or vegetarian source of protein was much better, created a much better chance of being pregnant and also staying pregnant and having a healthy pregnancy if it was more of a vegetarian source. So keep this in mind if you are a meat eater, that you may want to do very small portions of meat that are organic, grass-fed, as pure as possible, and then look at substituting or getting in more sources of vegetable protein, which can be from nuts and seeds and legumes, and really everything has traces of protein in there. Also, for miscarriage prevention, you want to do things like enough magnesium. Now, we can find this in things like alfalfa. And for zinc, sources are pumpkin and sunflower seeds. Vitamin E is in a lot of nuts and seeds as well. Iron you can get from greens, legumes, blackstrap molasses, and cooking in a cast iron skillet. And this is going to help guard against fetal malformation once you get pregnant. Then there's this whole aspect of folate versus folic acid. So in general, Folate helps prevent neural tube defects, which is the first part of the nervous system that forms when that embryo starts to divide and become a fetus. So we want to make sure that we're getting enough. All women of childbearing age should be taking in at least 400 micrograms. And if you're eating a lot of vegetables, you're getting a lot of folate. So if you do that, you won't need to take as much. It is a vitamin that passes through us. It doesn't concentrate in our cells. So it's very hard to get too much, except you do want the balance of folate with B12. So with our B vitamins, we can create deficiencies by taking in too much of a supplementation of one sort. So you do want to make sure there's that balance. And there's ways to do lab testing where you can get a good idea if you're getting adequate amounts based on what's going on with the red blood cell, believe it or not. And this is something I do in my office, whether it's a patient that I have here or from afar, because I have helped women from around the world, especially in the US, from afar, and being able to do this long distance. So with methylfolate, once you get pregnant, you do want to up that and make sure you're getting 800 micrograms, because that neural tube is going to start dividing very quickly. Even before we know we're pregnant, it starts dividing, and we don't want to have any major issues, something like spina bifida, which can occur if there's a neural tube defect. So leafy greens and vegetables there also gives the embryo better quality. It also reduces our risk of ovulatory problems, especially if women are having issues with MTHFR. Now, MTHFR is an enzyme, and its role is in the folate metabolic pathway, and it has to do with what's also going on with homocysteine production. So homocysteine, we don't want our levels to go too high, especially when we're trying to get pregnant, because if they go too high, it's going to affect what's going on actually in that follicular fluid that the egg is developing in. Okay, whew. So getting back to the methylfolate, this is a much better source than folic acid, because the methylation goes into this enzymatic pathway a lot easier, especially for women who are having MTHFR issues. And you can find that on a simple genetic test. That's just a cheek swab. And again, this is something that I can do quite easily with a kit. All right, so folate in general is a group of coenzymes, and enzymes are just things that drive processes. So it can be a vitamin, mineral, whatever. It drives a process. So this group of coenzymes, folate, plays a role in DNA synthesis, methylation, and protein synthesis. And DNA methylation is actually an epigenetic mechanism. And what I mean by that is whatever we're doing in our life, it's not our genes that are necessarily the determining factor, but whether we're switching those genes on and off. And epigenetics are what plays a part on that. So what you're eating, what you're breathing, what you're being exposed to, that will affect whether you have expression of a gene or not. Basically flipping the switch on or flipping it off. And then that will depend on how that gene is expressed. I know it can be kind of confusing, but the reason this is so good to know is we don't necessarily look at changing our genetic structure, but we can change how that genetic structure actually works and functions. And this is what we're talking about with using nutrition to do that. So this is one of the ways we can do it with things like folate. All right, enough of that. All right, proteins. So there was a long-term study, and this is the one I was talking about, where they replaced animal sources of protein with vegetable sources, and that tended to reduce ovulatory infertility risk. So we talked about what it takes to ovulate, and it seems like the type of protein that you are consuming affects what goes on with ovulation. It also helps to decrease androgens, and these are the male hormones that we all have. We all have testosterone, but it's the level. So we have far more estrogen and progesterone, and our androgens are really low. We need testosterone to be able to have a sex drive and, to have some muscle mass and whatnot, but we want our estrogen to be higher in order to have fertility. So if you have an imbalance and have too many androgens, then you can get into that field of maybe having issues with PCOS, like we talked last time with female fertility. And I'll put that link in the description so you can go back if you missed that. So, why I think this occurs is because what is happening with our meat production is these animals themselves are given hormones so that they can bulk up. A lot of times they're given steroids. And I think this is filtering through us as humans as we are consuming animal products. So this is just another thing to look at when you go, maybe I should incorporate more vegetarian protein. And it's unclear on how much protein is optimal. I could not really get a clear-cut answer to that. We know that we need enough protein because it helps with that balance of the hormones that I just talked about. But if we have too much, then it can create imbalances as well. So go figure. Let's just make sure that you're consuming some form of protein. And with vegetarian sources, you don't have to consume them all in the same meal. So don't worry about the whole combining thing. It doesn't play out anymore. They used to think so, but not so much. With carbohydrates, chronic intake of carbohydrates is associated with ovulatory disorders. So there's a difference between complex carbohydrates, which you might find in things like legumes or like a whole grain, versus simple carbohydrates like cookies, candies, cakes, sugar, ice cream, that type of thing. Very, very inflammatory, not great for the system, and it doesn't surprise me that there's this association with ovulatory disorders. Never mind that it puts you at risk for diabetes, which is a metabolic disorder, which has been known to be an issue with fertility. Fats and cholesterol. So this is a huge one, and I did talk about this in my optimal heart health because there's this misconception that cholesterol creates heart disease. That is definitely a misconception. Go back and watch that. Watch a documentary called Statin Nation. It's not cholesterol. Cholesterol is just the messenger. Cholesterol is just doing his job going, there's a little hole here created by inflammation and damage. I'm just going to put a little patch there. And we're like, oh my gosh, there's too much cholesterol. Our body makes cholesterol, all right? We don't even need it in our diet. So as a vegan, I don't take in animal products. I still make cholesterol. And that is the way it's supposed to be. We need cholesterol to make our hormones. You cannot have hormones without cholesterol. And so if you are cutting off and so concerned about cholesterol, then you take a drug, let's just say they say you have high cholesterol and you have to go on a statin, you are going to affect your hormone production. And you may even also affect your prostaglandins, which can either be balancing for the immune system or they can be very inflammatory, which then again can create problems. And then we talked about fats in general. Again, that balance. You don't want the trans fats, you don't want the fried foods, but you need those essential fats like we talked about. Talked about antioxidants and decreasing oxidative stress with your vitamins A, C, D, and E. And with vitamin C, it can help prevent miscarriages, but you have to watch and not take too much because it can also have an antihistamine effect. And there is this aspect of our cervical fluid and having it be fertile. And if you take too much vitamin C, you can actually dry it up. Same thing if you're taking an antihistamine medication. All right, that was a lot. I hope this helped. If you want some more help or specifically for you, so I love individualizing programs, you can talk to me. If you do not live in Los Angeles, you can certainly contact me. I'll put all my information in the description and I can help you from afar. All right, everybody, if you liked what I had to say, give me a thumbs up. Please share this with your friends, especially the ones who are trying to get pregnant. because our fertility as a society, not only in the US, but in the world, is decreasing. So we have to do all we can to up our chances to conceive. And of course, chiropractic helps with every single process because the brain controls everything in the body. All right, I will see you next Tuesday. If you have certain things you would like to know about, just let me know. Have a great one. Bye.